Thanks, Sherry. And so first up, good morning. Thanks to Sherry and Camilla for all the prep work and everything. And I don't know how Camilla does it, but and I was one of the really bad people. She only got my slides yesterday afternoon. So I'm from Cape Town. Professor Jansen said last night that most Cape Townians think that God stopped working at the Detroitskloof. I'm not sure if that's true, but I do know that I come from the most beautiful place in the world, and maybe Bloemfontein is second, so it's nice to be here. So I just want to talk very briefly about my perspective, where I'm coming from. I'm a public health person. I'm a trained clinical psychologist, but for me, I'm interested in public health. I'm interested in trying to get programs implemented at scale to benefit as many children as we can, as many infants and children. So there's a famous story, about a public health story, many of you probably heard this, of someone having a picnic at a river, and it's quite a fast-flowing river, and notice there's a child floating past. So they quickly get in, rescue that child, keep them warm, dry them, and then there's another one. And they do that, and they've done this about 10 times, and they're actually starting to get tired. And so what they decide to do is to walk up the river to try and find out where all these children floating down the river come from. So I'm very interested in that child floating down the river, but I'm also very interested in trying to understand what's happening upstream. This is just in terms of this sort of just to try and situate where I'm coming from a global health perspective. And I think it has resonance. We talk about South Africa. David was talking about South Africa and the lack of services. That's not just a South African issue. That's a global issue. And very much a lot of the global health perspective has been on keeping infants and children alive. And there have been remarkable successes. So, for example, the global under 5 mortality rate in the last 20 years has dropped from close to 12 million to 7 million. That is a remarkable achievement. But very often what's happening in global health is that where it stops. And then we don't think about all the other children that are surviving, and those children, the context in which they are then surviving. And I think it's very, very, very important that the context the children are dying in are often the same ones that many, many more children are in fact living in. And from the Lancet series, you know that 200 million children under 5 years are not meeting their developmental potential. And there's a host of reasons from that, from poor nutrition to conditions, to infections, to a whole number of things, and certainly to early childhood development services and interventions. Poverty, malnutrition, and understimulating home environments are absolutely central in this. Okay, why early is good? This is from a lovely book that anybody can download online. It's possibly a little dated now, but from Neurons to Neighborhoods. It's free, available online. You can download it. It's enormous. And basically showing the kinds of things that are happening, what we're talking about in terms of conception, but in terms of higher cognitive functioning, receptive language, seeing, hearing. And a lot of it is happening here. And in fact, in terms of the focus of this conference, often around, or most conferences around education, it's at this point here. This is where school starts. And obviously a lot is still happening until 18, and we're increasingly becoming aware of how much continues to happen in terms of brain development in adolescence. But the trajectory is already downwards. If we don't do stuff here, it's hugely problematic. We're missing a very, very important opportunity. And in terms of the cost of intervening early or intervening late, this is from the work of James Heckman. And in his initial work, he didn't have the conception. It started at preschool. And this is not supposed to say that you can't do anything here down at school. You can do things. It's never too late. There are things you can do. But in terms of the cost in return on your investment, it's already significantly more expensive to try and intervene late than to try and prevent and intervene early. Again, the red arrow, that's where school is. Okay, school readiness used to be, I was a trained clinical psychologist. We did school readiness assessments at age 5.5 or 6, and that's what school readiness is. School readiness is not about that. It's about, of course, that's a component of it, but it starts in the womb. It starts with what the mother is eating. It starts with what Tony was talking about her conceptions in her mind, her kind of conceptualization of that fetus. It starts there. And the notion of developmental cascades is something that's that's receiving a lot of research attention at the moment. And the idea that certain experiences build on other experiences in a very positive way, but equally in a very negative way. So the best example is, for example, a child who has attention difficulties or has difficulties in planning is going to be the same child that is going to find it difficult to sit in a desk and to concentrate on what the teacher is saying. He's going to find that incredibly difficult, and because of that, then gets into a negative cycle with the teacher. Is the child that's the first to get excluded, becomes a bit of a troublemaker, and this is what these developmental cascades are about. And if you're only intervening in adolescence, you're in trouble. On the aeroplane yesterday, I read a lovely quote from Faye Weldon, talking about parenting, and she says that parenting, when you become a parent for the first time, it's the first time you realize you're not a very nice person. And that in fact when you have teenagers, you then absolutely realize how all wars begin. And I think, and those cascades are important. This is from, I think Tony had a slide about the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard University. All their materials also free online, very useful. Why I wanted to say this is I'm a little bit of a troublemaker, so the idea of conception to career, I want to say actually it's before. We know that the nutritional status of women before they become pregnant is central to the extent to which the fetus grows optimally. And we know that the nutritional status of a pregnant woman is important. And we also know that the nutritional status, obviously, of that baby is important. And if we intervene all those stages, we have an enormous impact on that child. But the thing I find staggering, and this speaks to Professor Jansen's point yesterday on the Japanese example, about thinking 30 years in advance. The biggest impact we have if we do all those things, woman nutrition, pregnant woman nutrition, the baby, is on the child of the child. It's that next generation that you have your biggest impact. Try sell that to a funder, but so the question, I suppose, where do we start, is that obviously woman nutrition comes back to teenage mothers, and it comes back to women and a whole and girls. So we could just keep going on and on. But Philani, I'm not going to describe Philani in too much. It's existed since 1979. Bishop Tutu Art the Arch is the patron of Philani. Started out as a nutrition intervention organization, has now become a far broader community-based organization that does home visiting. So it starts in pregnancy and it moves through the first 6 months initially, but also afterwards. And in fact also works at a community level in terms of nutrition or malnourished children in rehabilitating them. So that continues. And community health workers, mentor mothers are at the core of that. 3 innovations. Philani selects they recruit very, very carefully. There's this notion of positive peer deviance that they use. The idea, it sounds terrible, it's the idea that you take women from within the community who had the same struggles, many of the same adversity, but themselves have had children that have grown up and thrived. So something they've done has worked. So they're considered positive peer deviance. The selection process of Philani is intensive, incredibly intensive, and very thorough. And they don't hold punches. They choose the best people. Training. Training is absolutely essential. This is a bit of a busy slide. But in terms of one of my big issues in terms of public health and scale up is around, right now what's happening is that teachers are being told, you must do this extra thing. Nurses are being told, you must do all these things because you don't have enough doctors. Community health workers are being told, you've got to do extra things. The reality is, if you're training anybody, from a community health worker to a teacher to a doctor, I would argue, there's a core foundation that is absolutely common to everybody. And we need to get everybody trained using foundational elements, which are about knowledge, committing to change, about role plays. It doesn't matter what the intervention is, that's there. You then have specific content. So in Philani, it's alcohol, it's HIV, it's maternal mental health, it's a whole suite of things. In a school situation, it might be something quite different. And then absolutely very important is that local tailoring. What might work in Khayelitsha, where I work, may not work in Zitalele in the Eastern Cape. So training is essential. And then I would argue, absolutely central is supervision and management. Philani does good old group-based, individual-based, face-to-face supervision. We also developed with them a web-based system of monitoring and evaluation, and I can send papers we've written on this to anybody who's interested on how we've done the system. So I can, for example, here today log onto my computer and I can find out who's visiting who today. It's unlikely to be happening on a Saturday morning, but if it is, I can do that. It's been incredibly useful for us in terms of, and that supervision of management is central. There's a lot of evidence from the world, good research evidence of how community-based programs work, but they often work when they're controlled by NGOs, very tightly and controlled by the researchers, and when they're taken to scale, they fail. And I would argue supervision and management are central in that. So what next? I'm very, very interested in the scale-up. And as I've just said, when things get scaled up, they tend not to work. Okay, I don't have an answer for this. We have to be thinking about this, and I know that DG Murray Trust, and I know a lot, and Sherry, and and Elifa, and various people are giving concerted thought to this. But we need to be thinking about how we scale up successful programs. Otherwise, they remain very small, and obviously small can be good, but we need to be thinking scale up. I'd just like to acknowledge Dr. Ingrid LaRue, who founded Philani 29 years ago, Kwani, who essentially runs a lot of the supervision and management, Professor Mary Jane Rotherham, my main research collaborator, Elifa for the funding of our follow-up. We've conducted a randomized controlled trial in Philani, and we're following up those children, the National Institute of Alcoholism, Alcohol Abuse in the US, and obviously the mothers and children in our study. Thank you.
My colleagues and I